Welcome to Shaped by Faith with your host, Theresa Rowe. To find out more about Shaped by Faith and Theresa Rowe, please visit shapedbyfaith.com or visit the YouTube channel, Facebook, or Instagram. And now, here is Theresa Rowe.
Welcome to Shaped by Faith. I'm your host, Theresa Rowe. I'm so honored to welcome a woman of many talents and deep faith to Shaped by Faith today. Her name is Patsy McCrory. She's a retired English teacher of 42 years, former newspaper reporter, photographer, and news editor. Patsy has a heart full of stories, a legacy rooted in faith and service, and a current mission that reflects the love of Christ. Patsy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Theresa.
Absolutely. I love how God connects us. And I say this all the time, but I wouldn't have known you unless it would have been through, our mutual friend connected us. And I'm just excited that God does that as we pray and ask Him to connect us with people. I would love to hear your backstory, maybe start with your roots and where you grew up and what your childhood was like.
I grew up in a little town in called Ashland, Mississippi, in Benton County. It's in North Mississippi, about 65 miles from where I'm living now in Horn Lake. It's the county seat of Benton County, and my dad's people were early settlers there, and he and his dad ran a farm until he decided to join the Army. And he ended up with luxury assignment to go to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. He thought it was a luxury assignment until December 7th, 1941, and we found out very quickly it wasn't such a luxury assignment. My mom is from Ashland also. She worked for the local doctor as a practical nurse and receptionist for him. And both of them taught us our faith. He was a member of the Baptist church. My mother was a member of the Methodist church along with her mom. And at the age of 9, I joined the Methodist church there too. I have two sisters who are younger. Marcia is a retired lab technician who worked at the University of Tennessee teaching future doctors and nurses microbiology lab techniques. And then my other sister lives in New Mexico and for years taught on the Navajo Indian Reservation out there. She went out there straight from college, taught for years at Shiprock and other places in and around Kirtland and Farmington, New Mexico. She too is retired. We're all retired now. But all of us have been taught by our family and our traditions to be Christian givers and altruistic in the things that we do.
Was there any key moments in your life that helped shape your relationship with the Lord?
Well, my youth, working with the church, I joined the church at the age of 9 and became involved in the Methodist Youth Fellowship. We called it MYF back then. And my Sunday school teachers were my teachers in school. They were my neighbors.
Oh, wow.
All through the years. They taught us, and we were all like family. And that's the way I feel toward my students through the years, that we're all like family. And they instilled much of my Christian teaching through the church. And the biggest influence on me there was my grandmother. She was a very giving person. She raised 5 children, 3 after her husband died of cancer, lung cancer. And then her second husband died of lung cancer. She had 2 more children with him. She had a total of 5 children and multiple grandchildren through the years. And yet she became a welfare foster parent to several children throughout the years. So she would always make sure that all the children, foster children and the grandchildren, had a way to church every Sunday. And she was a very giving person, and I learned a lot through her.
Sounded like you were surrounded by a lot of good people, a lot of, Christ followers who loved the Lord, who were selfless, who did what God was calling them to do. That's wonderful. That's such a blessing. Patsy, you've lived, an amazing, exciting life. I mean, when I was mentioning your bio. I mean, you were a news reporter, a photographer, a news editor. So, what drew you into the world of journalism?
Well, I was influenced by my friendship with a little disabled girl named Ann Hill. She was a writer because that was
Hmm.
all she could do. She could barely move her fingers to hold a pencil or a pen. She would use the pen or the pencil to hit the keys on her IBM Selectric typewriter, and she would write stories for the local newspaper. And from the age of 9, she started becoming involved in fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital out of Memphis. And she got to meet a lot of famous people through her work with St. Jude. Her dad was friends with the man who was the manager at the Mid South Coliseum in Memphis. And whenever anyone important came to town to have a political rally or to perform on stage, different performers from the 60s and the early 70s, her dad was able to get her backstage passes, and the manager would allow her to take these people into a back room and interview the stars when they would come to perform in Memphis. And I was able, she always had to have someone to help her. And if
Hmm.
you helped her stuff envelopes and fundraise for St. Jude, she would allow you to join her backstage in interviewing these people. So it was so intriguing to me, and it inspired me. And she wanted to become a writer, a journalist, and she knew that that was the only occupation that she could do with her limitations.
Hmm.
And she wanted to go to college and get a degree so that she could be paid to do her writing. But she wrote a column called Backstage, where she interviewed stars that came into town for concerts, and she shared their stories. And I got to be there for a lot of those. I was really there for the latter part of her life. Her friends were older than I was, and my cousins were closer in the very beginning than I was. After they all grew up and went off to college and got married, then uh, I was left there to help take up the slack and help her with her projects and things that she was doing. But she wanted to be a journalist too. And,
Mm.
I took up the torch after she inspired me to also want to do that.
What an incredible story. I mean, wow. Wow. I mean, I love how God orchestrates everything exactly as it should be, as we're following Him. I mean, that's the key. We have to follow Him. But what an amazing friendship I'm sure you developed with your friend, and what an opportunity. I mean, most people don't get that opportunity, and the world has changed
Right.
so much that, I'm just thinking about all those great things that you got to experience at a very young age. Was there
Well,
any like, oh, go ahead, Patsy.
Well, she didn't think of herself as disabled. She felt like that her disability gave her more opportunities than she would have had she been a normal child. But she had
Mm-hmm.
a disease, a genetic disorder called amyotonia that prevented her muscles from forming properly. As she grew, her muscles grew thinner and thinner. She didn't make new muscle uh,
Mm-hmm.
tissue. And by the time she was 25 years old, she was literally skin and bones.
Mm.
But she used those fingers. Her dad would make her pick up pennies off the table each night, and
Mm-hmm.
she would save those pennies each week and would go to town with him and would get candy for all the pennies she had picked up to keep her muscles in her hands working. And she never said a pessimistic uh, negative thing about her situation. She took it in
Mm-hmm.
stride, and even she was a person who was homeschooled, who whose parents taught her uh, all kinds of things, and she read on her own. She was a voracious reader, and one of the people that she admired most was Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who taught
Mm.
his theory of positive power of positive thinking. And she
Yeah.
got to meet him on two different occasions, I know. And she learned a lot from him, but I think in return, I think he learned a lot from her because she was the most positive person I ever met.
God gave her that platform. She knew that. She knew that in her spirit. And that's incredible. God uses what he's given us. Even if we may have something going on, God will use that. And he honored her by using that. Patsy has a heart full of stories and a legacy, which is most important, rooted in faith and service. So, Patsy, I would love to hear maybe a memorable story that you covered during your time as a reporter.
Well, there was not one particular story. I covered several beats. I did everything at the newspaper. I did layout. I did darkroom photo processing. I even took the paper to press to have it printed, and then I would deliver it to the racks. I did
Oh
everything.
my
Back
goodness.
in the 70s, I was the junior member under the editor. But anyway, I learned a lot from attending meetings of the Board of Supervisors, the school board. I
Mhm.
had a regular beat that I covered. I'd go to the sheriff's department and check on arrests and that kind of thing. And I learned so much about community leadership and the workings of our county government and our city government and that kind of thing. I did a weekly column called Profiles, and every one of those articles that I did were about outstanding people in the community. And then I did another column weekly called Cook of the Week, and I got to actually go into ladies' homes, and they would cook examples of food that they were that were their specialties, and they would
Uh-huh.
share those recipes, and I would put them in the paper. And it started me collecting recipes, and I've been doing it now for over 50 years. And one of these days, maybe I'll do a cookbook of my own. But I was getting up in the middle of the night, going to cover fires and wrecks and all kinds of things. And it just wasn't conducive to family life at all. So I decided to go back and fall back on my second occupation that I trained for, which is to be an English teacher.
Yeah, let's
And
talk about that. So you're an English teacher, creative writing, and photography for over 4 decades. What did you love most about teaching?
Oh, the students, definitely the students. I, all through the years, I wanted to have a child of my own and was not blessed in that respect, not until a miracle happened at the age of 41. And I finally had my one and only daughter then. But my students were my family. I
Mhm.
really felt like I adopted them, just like my teachers back at home adopted all of us, like family when we were
Mhm.
growing up. And I like to teach by example and show them the way that they should behave toward one another and that kind of thing with respect. And I taught values clarification in addition to the content that we were required to cover. We put English into practical use. We did an annual, we did a newspaper, we did a set of plays, we did uh, uh, literary magazine. We also put on a Mid-South Fair sanctioned talent show every year. My creative writing group were competitive trying to get into my class because we did so many fun things. They actually put English to practical use. They had to do a demonstration speech, and we would get out on the lawn in front of the school, and one of our boys launched a rocket as part of his demonstration. We sat under trees in the back part of the school yard and we would write poetry. I mean, it was just so much fun, and they were such willing learners. It helped me to appreciate the teaching profession.
How did you incorporate your faith into the classroom setting?
Well, you couldn't just outright proselytize,
Mhm.
but there were times when stories would bring on a correlation with something that was discussed in the Bible, and I could make references to things like that. And back in the day, we actually were allowed to teach the books of Psalms uh, as part of the curriculum, as part of the
Mm,
content
that's
literature.
wonderful.
And nowadays, they don't allow such things. They're getting away from the literary studies and doing more technical reading and writing. And I think that's a shame because you really get into value and uh, uh, character building skills when you get into those other things. And they were inspired by the stories they read to write their own stories.
Yeah.
And I gave them a venue for publishing some of their poetry and some of their stories through the things that we produced, the work that we did in our creative writing class.
Sounds like a lot of fun. I really wish you were my teacher back in the day. Do you see any parallels between being a teacher and being a disciple maker for Christ?
Totally. For so many of these students, they're not allowed to. Many of them come from broken homes, and many of them have no connections to a church whatsoever. And you're their only connection. And I took that seriously. I wanted to, have them see what I saw in the people around me growing up. They always taught us a respect for faith. And Anne Hill, my friend, whose biography I'm writing, taught me the word ecumenical. I learned that there were a lot of different faiths, and that not just one faith had the market on God's forgiveness and God's power. I believe that ecumenicalism would probably stop a lot of the worldly problems we're having right now. We would appreciate each other's differences, and as long as we're all people of faith, I think we can live together harmoniously, even though we have different labels for our faith.
Absolutely. Amen to all of that. Now, you mentioned your father in the first segment and his story. I would love to hear just a little bit more, maybe share what he experienced during, especially the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Oh, that was so horrific. When he came home from the war, he was a broken man. He had to spend some time in a mental ward in the VA hospital, the Kennedy complex in Memphis. And he saw horrible things during the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He had to help get the bodies out of the bay. And he talked about the horrors of some of those bodies being so burned that when they would pull them into the little boats that they were rescuing the bodies, that they would just literally fall apart. And that was graphic. He was on a hillside overlooking the bay when the bombing started. He was already out there directing traffic because people were going to and from churches and that kind of thing. This little old couple came up to him and scolded him. They said, "Young man, why are they having maneuvers on Sunday?" The bombing had already started, and my dad was overlooking the bay and had a view of all of it. And he said, "Hell, folks, that's not maneuvers, that we're being attacked. Those are Japanese bombers." And he said, "Get out of here." And they sped off in an old truck with running boards on each side. And just about that time, Zero, one of the Japanese aircraft, came flying over and strafed the ground toward that truck. And it took the running boards off both sides of the truck, but it didn't evidently hurt the people because they continued going. But the plane banked and came back toward my dad where he was directing traffic. He jumped into a ditch as the bullets were strafing the ground, and there was a sugarcane patch behind him. And after the plane banked and left, he got up out of the ditch and was wearing sugarcane pieces and juice all over his uniform. When he returned to base, to his barracks at Schofield Barracks, the walls of the building where he had slept that night were full of bullet holes. Several of the men that were friends of his had been killed. He saw that Hickam Field had all of their airplanes lined up in a line, getting ready should they be needed. And that was really a mistake because the Japanese were able to just take them one after the other in a line and ruined all of our aircraft for the most part. But my dad remembered a communique that he had personally taken to the leaders, Kimmel and Short, and it had warned that the Japanese fleet was on their way. In some direction. They weren't in their home base anymore. And they thought in Washington, since they were going through some peace talks, talking about lifting some embargoes and that kind of thing, that surely they wouldn't attack Pearl Harbor. That's the United States. But they felt like they would be more likely to go to Manila Bay in the Philippines. So they were just put on warning to be ready should anything happen, because the Japanese fleet was unaccounted for. Well, they were told to stand down and wait for further notice. And they had the planes ready. They had everybody on high alert should they be needed, but the notification never came. And my dad said if he had had that communique that he delivered as a courier, that it would have proven that these two men were not responsible or derelict in their duties.
Mm-hmm.
But both of them were forced to retire and lost their ranking and that kind of thing because they held them responsible. And he thoroughly believed that they should not have been held responsible. But he went from there to other battles. He kept a diary of 350 different attacks by the Japanese against the group that he was with. And he ended up at Guadalcanal. He was fighting snipers hidden in the trees, and my dad was a sharpshooter, so he was getting rid of a lot of the snipers at Guadalcanal after the Marines had already opened it up for the rest of the troops to come in. But he was at New Georgia Island, and a bomb landed next to his foxhole, and it blew him out of the foxhole, ruptured his eardrums, and he had PTSD from that point on. He called it shell shock back in those days, but we know it's PTSD. And that's when he ended up in a mental facility in Memphis, Tennessee. It ended up being his ticket home. And but he never liked to be around noise or crowds after that. All three of us played basketball, my two sisters and I, and he would come to the games after the game had already started. He would stand in the doorway and watch just for a little while. But if the crowd started getting loud, he would pack up and leave. He wouldn't stay because he couldn't stand the noises.
Right.
And his happiest moments were when he was out fishing silently, quietly to himself, fishing or hunting out in the woods.
That is remarkable, incredible, and unbelievable, actually, Patsy, to hear all of that at the same time.
Oh,
Wow.
that's nothing
Wow.
to compare with his story about dying, and I'll tell you that when we get to that point.
Okay. You are a gifted storyteller as well. You're welcome. We need to get into this biography that you're writing about your friend, Anne. So why don't you tell us about it?
Well, her mom and dad wanted her to live as normal a life as possible. The doctors told the family when she was born that they ought to put her in an institution, but they had waited so long to have that one and only daughter. They didn't want to do that. They told them that they would take the child that God gave them home with them and love her as long as they could. Her condition, back then, only people lived to be about 8 years old at the most with that condition. And she lived to be 25 years old and was the record setter for someone with amyotonia at that time. But she didn't let her physical disabilities stop her. She became a professional writer. She at the age of 9, heard Danny Thomas on TV requesting people to start saving money to donate to his new hospital that he wanted to put in Memphis called St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And he said that in a year he was going to come to Memphis to Crump Stadium in a former baseball stadium, and they were going to have a fundraiser. And if you had at least $1,000 to donate, you could go up on stage and present that money personally to Danny and have your picture made with him and possibly have it in the paper. Well, Anne and her friends started a lemonade stand in front of her dad's Western Auto store there on the square in Ashland. My dad had a little store across the other side of the square, a little grocery store, and her friends gathered around with her, and they sold lemonade and cookies all summer long, and were dressed in these little white gowns they'd worn to their Baptist girls' auxiliary program. It was almost like gowns, and they went up on stage to present him this check for little over $1,000. And her picture was on the front pages of the newspapers the next day. And he wrote her a personal letter and said of all the donations that were made that day, hers was the greatest, because he couldn't imagine someone with her disabilities being able to do something like that. So he was her mentor from then on. They had a 14-year friendship. He made her the state fundraising chairman for the whole state of Mississippi. She would go to the governor's office and he would write proclamations making it St. Jude Day in Mississippi, and all the kids would go around with little jars collecting money, trick-or-treating for St. Jude and that kind of thing. And she always gathered around all of her friends that collected the money, and they would take it to St. Jude Hospital. She was there the day that the doors opened. She got started with it before they even laid the first brick, but she was also there in the middle of the parade with right beside Danny Thomas on Danny Thomas Boulevard when they were opening the doors of the hospital for the first time. And there's a film in the center there. Has a big gold dome on it, and it shows the film of that actual day. And he's putting a kiss on her cheek, and he said in the film, "It's not because that I'm appreciative of all the work she's done. I just really love her." And he came to Ashland with a motorcycle escort and a couple of big limos, and brought his whole entourage in and filmed a promotional film there at Ashland to promote St. Jude and to highlight her efforts. They called her someone like a CEO by the way that she organized the youth of our community. If you worked for her, she would take you along with her to visit at Elvis Presley's home. Some people would go to concerts with her. She would do backstage interviews with famous people. And it was just a who's who of famous people back in the day. But she started working with St. Jude from the age of 9 and continued till she was 25 years old. During her short lifetime, she also wanted to graduate from high school, but the laws wouldn't allow her to go through a regular graduation because she had been homeschooled. But the local folks put a little pressure on the school board, and she got to be pushed by my aunt down the aisle to get her certificate of completion for her coursework that she did at home and through correspondence courses. That wasn't enough. She wanted to go to college. She wanted a real degree, and she tried first at a junior college, but only lasted about 5 or 6 weeks, and then she got sick with pneumonia. So that had to stop. She just couldn't take it physically. And she ended up taking courses by correspondence from Ole Miss. And I was a campus senator at Ole Miss at the time, and I proposed that we make an exception for Ann and she be allowed to graduate totally by correspondence courses. So she was going to be the first test case. And unfortunately, she died of pneumonia before we could finish that last project for her.
Your friend reminds me of the scripture the whole time you were, sharing about her. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I know people know that verse, but it reminds me of, as you're speaking of her exactly. What an amazing, opportunity to write about your friend and to share the stories with all of us. What an incredible opportunity you've been given by the Lord. So, Patsy, when do you think your book will come out?
Well, that depends. I would need people to pray that we find the proper publisher. I'm old-fashioned enough. I don't want to self-publish. I'm a teacher living on a retirement income, and I just can't afford to publish it myself. But I do need one lady who works with a New York publisher has offered to not only make a publishing deal with us on it, but she suggested that it might be a good documentary film. We have a lot of tape recordings of interviews with famous people. We have photographs of her with all kinds of famous people, and her life was so inspiring. I just hope that we can finish it within the next year.
Oh, I believe so. Okay, so I'm going to have you back on, and we're going to also talk about your father, okay, in our next interview. But thank you so much, Patsy, for being an amazing guest on Shaped by Faith today.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Shaped by Faith with Theresa Rowe. Remember to visit shapedbyfaith.com to find out more about workouts, the TV show, podcasts, blogs, Shaped by Faith products, and much more.